Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind is a 1984 science fantasy anime film directed by Hayao Miyazaki, based on his based manga, also titled Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. It tells the story of a young princess who loves and sees the value in all living things, whose peaceful post-apocalyptic agrarian life is thrown into turmoil by the unearthing of an ancient superweapon, and the factions who war to possess it. Nausicaä, who wishes to understand the true nature of her world, becomes embroiled in the conflict that could spell doom for the remainder of humanity, and yada yada yada. It's not like this film isn't popular or anything. In 1985, an evil man named Corman eviscerated poor sweet innocent Miyazaki's movie with a comically large pair of scissors, so dumb American kids would understand it. And years later, his even eviler co-conspirator and sex pest Weinstein tried to do the same with a katana to Miyazaki's remake of Nausicaä, Princess Mononoke. Sorry, but, actually, that's not what really happened. Warriors of the Wind is the controversial 95-minute English-language adaptation of Nausicaä created by Manson International. It's become kind of hard to find discussions about this version with any kind of nuance or objectivity. It's viewed in popular consensus as nothing more than a relic to be mentioned in anime clickbait top 10s about those awful historical dubbed and localized versions, and so very little actual research about it has been undertaken by scholars and amateurs alike. This is problematic because factual accounts of how this version came into being and why the changes were undertaken, sourced from people involved with it, are now mostly lost to or obscured by the passage of time. While more notorious figureheads in early anime importation like, say, Carl Macek have had their stories told long ago, I have found the reaction to this version often petty at best. It's just that the prevailing narrative is so boring. It's that we should all be content that Nausicaä got a better release in English, and we should just forget about Warriors, and when we are not supposed to forget about it, it's only to remind us of what it does wrong, or to emphasize how much attitudes in anime and foreign media localization have changed. All this, coupled with the lack of any real interest beyond its retrospective novelty, has circumvented any real looks into its production history. There is more to be said about this version beyond simply what it does wrong. Let's go back to before the release of the film in Japan. Sometime during the production of Nausicaä, Tokuma Shoten pre-sold the foreign sales rights to the Tokyo-based World Film Corporation, which also operated as the World Television Corporation, who were eager and hopeful to use the film as a catalyst to introduce more Japanese animation into the North American marketplace. World Film was established in 1964 by Atsuyuki Miyoshi, who had previously worked in the Shochiku sales division. Goro Uzaki, who had previously worked for Toho International's Los Angeles and New York offices, initially directed export sales. I really can't find a whole lot in Japanese or English about the company, so someone with better resources and an actual command of Japanese will have to undertake that assignment. In the fourth quarter of 1983, independent Hollywood import-exporter Manson International purchased the distribution rights to the world sans Japan and South Korea. While overwhelmingly purported to have been established in 1953 by Sam Nathanson and Edmund Goldman, hence the name Manson combining the pair's surnames, from what I can gather from the trade periodicals available to me, Manson International began its on-record existence in late 1955 as the Manson Distributing Corporation, founded by Goldman and film industry attorney Paul Schreibman. Earlier in life, Goldman had served as a district manager of several overseas branches of Columbia Pictures, most notably its offices in the Philippines, where from 1942 to 1945, he was held prisoner in the Los Baños internment camp by the occupying Imperial Japanese forces. During his internment, he allegedly formed a close relationship with a Japanese guard, who became an executive in the film business after the war, or so the story goes. By the early 60s, Goldman, who was now busy as the president of Schreibman's Topaz Film Corporation, handed the presidential duties of Manson to his son Michael. In these earlier days, Manson tended to specialize predominantly in stuff like skinsploitation and action or fare, but there were some horror and science fiction titles. Point is, Manson and the individuals involved with it were no strangers to dealings in Japanese genre cinema. Goldman was the most prominent individual concerned in the original negotiations for the North American rights to the original Godzilla. As the Manson Distributing Corporation, they were credited as the co-producer of Nikatsu's kaiju film Gappa. In general, the Goldmans kept close ties to figures in the Japanese film industry. By the mid-70s, MDC changed its name to Manson International and began to shift some focus towards more generalized genre fare, including a bigger emphasis on horror and science fiction by the end of the decade, when the reign of American International handling the wider share of such properties ceased, leaving the market to companies like New World and Manson to carve up anew. Well, we know what happened between fourth quarter 83 and fourth quarter 84 on the Japanese side. Nausicaä performed very well domestically in its theatrical run by Toei. Its release on home video by Tokima's Onimage video imprint fared similarly. The timeline of the actual post-production work on Warriors is a trouble spot for me. Riley Jackson is credited as the producer for the English version. While he started during the golden age of radio, working his way up through the grind and technical learnings of the trade, eventually producing episodes of programs like Suspense and also moving on to television work for Dumont, Jackson has a sizable body of work pertaining to the English language adaptations of foreign films. In 1961, he and fellow showman Robert Patrick established Parade Releasing, which handled such dubbed genre titles as The Pre-Jalo Mill of the Stone Women and the Toho war epic I Bomb Pearl Harbor. Because of his work on the latter film, he was chosen by S. Richard Crown to work on the English versions of two UPA co-productions with Toho, those being Monster Zero and The War of the Gargantuas. This in turn led him to do ADR work on King Kong Escapes, Godzilla's Revenge, The Retreat from Kiska, High Seas Hijack, and the UPA television version of Prophecies of Nostradamus, The Last Days of Planet Earth. Early in 1982, he established the company Showman Incorporated, which while listed in trade periodicals pertaining to radio and film services from time to time, its only known work is Warriors of the Wind. While Jackson sold his services separately from Parade in the early to late 60s as Riley Jackson Productions, the physical address associated with Showman Incorporated has also belonged to a later iteration representing the former holdings of Parade, also named Riley Jackson Productions or in some cases Riley Jackson Films. I think it could be safe to say Showman was just a more formal name for his post-production services. Serving as creative consultant for the English dialogue was David Schmuller, known for such horror films as Tourist Trap, Crawl Space, and Puppet Master. I had wanted to conduct an interview with Mr. Schmuller, but he retired from the University of Las Vegas in 2019, and his personal email no longer functions.
It wasn't working out.
Anyway, he had a working association with Manson going back to the late 70s, working on titles like The Day Time Ended. I assume Warriors was just another job for him to put food on the table and pay the bills. If someone does manage to contact him, I don't expect him to remember a whole lot beyond what he already stated in his brief email correspondence with Twain Nguyen from 2015, where he seems to imply he was tasked with reworking the dialogue of an existing English dub provided as a basis. Although the initial agreements were reported in the trade articles in Q4 83, on the Library of Congress's Copyright Archive, I found that the on-the-books transfer of rights from World Television Corporation to Manson International was executed on August 17, 1984, and reported on September 4th. Now, I don't know if that lines up with when the post-production work was undertaken, but we do know that trade ads started appearing in Variety in October. Ezra Tucker's artwork, which was clearly based on Yoshiyuki Takani's artwork for one of the Japanese posters, went through several iterations, beginning with Asbel, or Milo writing with Nausicaä, or Zandra, him being replaced with Yupa and Kai, or Koi, on the ground, and lastly, a revision that restores Nausicaa's classic 1,000-yard stare. Warriors of the Wind premiered at the MyFed in Milan, Italy on October the 29th. After the MyFed screenings, Manson began touring the film at other multimedia expositions and festivals. From November the 22nd to December the 2nd, it played at the 14th Paris International Festival of Fantastic and Science Fiction Films, where it won the Special Jury Prize. On the 8th and 10th of March, '85, it played at the American Film Market, which Michael Goldman was heavily involved with. In April, the North American buyer and distributor was announced. It was New World Pictures, who founder Roger Corman had sold 2 years earlier. While he retained ownership of his prior film library, the New World remained the distributor and had agreements to release new titles produced by Corman's New Horizons, agreements which weren't really panning out smoothly. So around this time, he was having some nasty legal kerfuffles with them regarding this dispute, but the point is, he had absolutely nothing to do with the creative process of Warriors of the Wind, nor New World's marketing or handling of the film. Although I'm sure the suits and countersuits going on weren't exactly helping New World's operations or decision-making processes that year. On June 14th, New World opened the film in 7 Floridian metropolitan areas, and the performance was not good, to say the least. Though when the competition was Rambo and the Goonies, one couldn't expect much. By the second week, the film had only brought in a figure of less than $16,000, or about $45K today. This underwhelming, limited run, I suppose, discouraged New World from giving the film the wide release that it sorely deserved. Meanwhile, overseas, it again took away a film festival accolade, this time from the International Science Fiction and Fantasy Film Show in Rome, where it won, depending on which source you read, either Best Fantasy Film or Best Short Film? By July 17th, Warriors was already confirmed in Variety as part of the selection for the first annual Los Angeles International Animation Celebration. On September 13th, the film opened in Ohio, where it received a very positive review from critic Terry Lawson for the Dayton Daily News, notable for a number of reasons. Even in its abridged form, he was able to recognize and appreciate the strengths inherent to the picture, praising the presentation of its allegorical aspects and the strong, unchallenged characterizations of Nausicaä and Kushana. He picks up on the visual influence from French comic artists and delivers probably the first utterance in an Anglosphere publication regarding the Nausicaä wears no underwear urban legend. Oh dear. At 7:30 p.m. on September the 27th, the film was shown at the Wadsworth Theater in Los Angeles for the International Animation Celebration. In the competition, it garnered the first prize for animated feature film. In October, ads for the video release began appearing, and in November, Warriors of the Wind was released on VHS and beta by New World Video. In the Northeast, as well as in Ontario, the film continued playing at some matinee screenings during this month. On January the 9th, 1986, it played accompanied by Shinichi Nagasaki's short film London Calling at the Lila Akeson Wallace Theater in New York as part of an exhibition by the Japan Society. Also in March, it played at least one theater in Manitoba. On August the 6th, Warriors of the Wind premiered on HBO and would continue to be shown on the network until June the 1st, 1988. Now let's do the part of the video where I talk about what Warriors of the Wind does differently in regards to the editing, name changes, etc. The deletions and alterations have been documented many times, but here we go. Opening vanities and production credits aside, the picture begins fundamentally the exact same way, with Lord Yupa and his horse-claw steeds Kai and Koi in the wasteland, where they investigate a ruined and overrun human settlement. You lose the line, soon all this too will sink into the sea of decay, for a more matter-of-fact,
We'd better leave before the air kills us, too.
Instead of the wordy expository text detailing the state of the world and the precedents for humanity's survival, we get a simple title, Somewhere in the World 1,000 Years From Now. Well, unless you read the manga or did some diving into supplementary material yourself, you might not know that originally, Nausicaä takes place a millennium after the collapse of an advanced civilization, centuries after the 20th. Warriors intentionally or unintentionally simplifies this as 1,000 years after the present. The opening titles, over the tapestry depicting civilization's collapse, the 7 Days of Fire, the formation of the new ecological order, and the winged prophetic figure, are deleted. This meticulously crafted and captivating opening sequence, underscored by Hisaishi's melancholic main theme, is a great example of why Nausicaä as a whole is such a compelling film. It asks the audience to perceptively engage with the world of the story, and it stirs the emotions in a very profound way. So the sting from its wholesale removal is understandably felt. Warriors picks up after the tapestry footage ends, on Nausicaa's flyover of the toxic jungle. A shot of the remains of a god warrior is shifted to the start of the sequence to serve as a better establishing shot, and new music, sound effects, and narration are added. The rather low-key music is most likely stock. I haven't been able to identify it. The added sound effects for Nausicaa's powered glider, the Muva, renamed the Cloud Climber in the script, actually accompany scenes with the craft as sweetening throughout the film. The narration, read by Hal Smith, gives the gist of the setting and establishes the overall character of our heroine, now renamed Zandra.
It is a time when the world is still recovering from the 7 days of fire, an event that left many civilizations in ruin. And in this valley, a spirited princess named Zandra dedicates herself to a tomorrow of peace and joy and hope.
Why did they change her name to Zandra? I can think of a couple of reasons. One, it's 2 syllables. Nausicaä, which is supposed to be pronounced something more like Nausicaä, in any case is syllabically slurred as Nausicaä in Japanese. 2. Well, Zandra is the name of a princess who appears in the 1943 RKO film Tarzan Triumphs, who, like Nausicaa, presides over an isolated valley community and must contend with militaristic invaders, in this case, Nazis instead of Tolmekians. Tip of the hat for Tarzan heads, I guess. I really don't know. Etymologically, like Nausicaa, Zandra is Hellenistic, though, coming from either Cassandra or Alexandra, which do have meanings that can fit the overall character of Nausicaa. I don't know. I think it just boils down to the name being, well, simpler. After the sequence ends, we have a few more seconds of black between the cold open and the title card, where the credit for Manson International has been placed. The title card appears over the initial establishing shot of the interior of the jungle. The swell of the main theme from the original Japanese ending credit sequence has been placed here, before it fades out and the normal soundtrack resumes. Zandra does not note the presence of the Om tracks. There is no equivalent dialogue here. Warriors heavily cuts the sequence where Nausicaa investigates the Om shell. Removed are the initial establishing shots of the find, Nausicaa testing its hardness with her super ceramic knife, and her removal of the eye with the aid of the gunpowder of one of her siren shells. In the edited sequence, she just removes the eye with little resistance. Nausicaa, observing the Mushigo palm fungi releasing their spores, where she finds irony in their beautiful deadliness, is removed. Warriors picks up after Zandra hears gunshots and investigates. From here until Nausicaa shows the villagers the Om eye, the film is unedited for about 9 minutes, and I'll go over some of what's different in the dialogue. The Om are renamed the Gorgons, or Giant Gorgons. Olmu, literally a truncation of king insect with several other imbued connotations, seems rather clunky in English. Gorgon was probably chosen as a generic descriptor for a large, frightening creature, which, like it or not, the Om are, but it may also refer to their multitude of limbs as well as their golden tendrils. Also, the toxic jungle has a penchant for turning people to stone. I think the line,
"You're a beauty, my friend, but just too dangerous,"
somewhat reflects the intent of the earlier scene with the Mushigo palm spores. Nausicaa has great respect and admiration for the jungle, but is all too familiar with its associated dangers to humanity.
"Be a good giant and don't give me a hard time. Doesn't look like this little devil's gonna cooperate."
I do think Zandra comes off more condescending and belligerent than empathetic and understanding here. Lord Yupa's name throughout the dub is stressed with the short U sound rather than the long U sound.
Lord Yupa! Lord Yupa!
That's Lord Yupa!
I really don't care about such a triviality, to be honest.
I missed you, Uncle. I'm glad to have you back.
Zandra refers to Lord Yupa, her martial arts instructor and overall mentor, as her uncle, but this clearly refers to a fictive kinship between the two, rather than blood relations. Tato the fox squirrel is only referred to by Zandra as Foxy in the dub. Pretty creative. The sequence where Zandra gains his trust more or less gets the meaning across just fine.
I won't hurt you. Oh! He won't hurt me once he knows I'm a friend. Friends?
Zandra explains her father's ailment as a result of his prolonged activities in the toxic jungle, rather than an impartial, cruel fate bestowed to all who dwell near it. The references to Nausicaa's laboratory are removed in the dialogue, so she's now merely enthusiastic of hearing of Yupa's travels. Mito, one of the stewards of the castle and Nausicaa's right-hand man, is renamed Axel, which I think is appropriate for the sort of rough and readiness the character exhibits. The scene showing the villagers assessing the Eye and making plans for the retrieval of further material from the carapace, Nausicaa asking Yupa to be the godfather of Toeto's baby, and Mito joking about the precariousness of Nausicaa's activities in the jungle is removed. The scene where Yupa discusses his journey with Zandra, her father, and the matriarch is more or less a straightforward adaptation of the Japanese, but Yupa's closing comments are more encouraging than pessimistic.
ユパ様、私古い言い伝えだとばかり思ってました。
ババ様、からかわれては困る。
同じことじゃろが。
私はただ不快の謎を解きたいと願っているだけだよ。我々人間はこのまま不快に飲まれて滅びるよう定められた種族なのか。それを見極めたいのだ。
Uncle Yupa, do you think a beautiful legend like that could really happen?
I think dreams like that belong to children like you.
There's truth in dreams.
I'm too old to believe in fairy tales and legendary characters who solve all the problems of the world. But the young should never give up their dreams and hopes. The future of the world lies with you.
The film is unedited for another 10 minutes, so again, I'll go over dialogue differences. The Empire of Tolmekia is renamed Temecula, which also happens to be a city in the SoCal Inland Empire. The city-state of Pejite, which is named after a similar settlement in an earlier Miyazaki work, his manga People of the Desert, is renamed Placida. I don't really see how these changes are a big deal, them being replacement three-syllable names for fictional territories. I figure they were probably chosen because they're similar-sounding names that roll off the tongue in English better. Zandra refers to the unnamed grub-like insects that attack the Temeculan transport vessel as Loki bloodsuckers. The flying insect Zandra escorts from the crash site back to the edge of the jungle is referred to as a giant gadfly, more or less an equivalent translation of its Japanese name, Ushiabu, which in real life refers to a kind of horsefly. The name gadfly also appears in the glossary of terms appearing in the English Nausicaa translation book published by Onimage. The valley residents mounting a search and destroy sweep in the crop fields for fungal spores brought in from the crash is cut. Since Axel orders the men at the crash site to join in the operation anyway, this brief scene was probably deemed unnecessary. The biotechnological titans that destroyed the old world, the giant god warriors, are renamed the fire demons. I think it's an appropriately menacing name for what are, ostensibly, living thermonuclear weapons, which in the story of the film are not awarded the same level of narrative depth and moral ambiguity as they are in the much later chapters of the manga. Fire Demon is also much less cumbersome in English than Giant God Warrior or Giant God Soldier. Interestingly, this name is also used in the 1993 Tokuma's Magical Adventure series translation of the Nausicaa picture book. Her Royal Highness Kushana is renamed and I suppose promoted to Queen Selena, supposedly now the outright ruler of Temecula. In the original, she's merely a princess, just like Nausicaa, and one of the themes of the film is the contrast between the two. Of course, it's not like the movie makes light of Kushana's backstory and interfamilial struggle inherent in the manga's text anyway. Kushana's subordinate, Kuratoa, is referred to generically as the General in the dialogue. However, ad copy for screenings of the film at U.S. military bases and the ESM International Dubbing Incorporated Latin American Spanish dub refer to his character as Rogan, indicating this may have been his name in the dubbing script.
Todo está bien, señor Rogan.
Correcto. Entonces, debemos ir a hablar con Rogan.
The destination of Selena's convoy is changed to Temecula rather than the occupied Pejite as in the original. Next, we have what is, in my opinion, the most significant cut to the film, and the reason why Warriors of the Wind's editing is frequently heralded as inexcusable. On the eve of Kushana and the hostages' flight to Pejete, Yupa discusses with Mito his plan to prevent the revival of the God Warrior. Later, Yupa searches for Nausicaä and discovers her hidden underground laboratory, where with clean water and sand she has raised fungal growths from the toxic jungle that are harmless to humans. Since through her research she has discovered the toxins the fungi exude are concentrated in the earth itself, the entire planet's surface having been polluted by the fallout of the 7 days of fire. Now a political prisoner, Nausicaä is forced to kill the fungi and abandon her research to uncover a cure for the petrification disease that plagues the villagers and afflicted her now-deceased father. Nausicaä breaks down in tears in her mentor's arms, terrified at the heretofore unknown rage dwelling inside her that drove her to commit impulsive acts of vengeful bloodshed. This sequence in the original version is of extraordinary importance, because not only does it show the fruits of Nausicaa's inquisitiveness and ability to see in a different light what others fear and hate, but also emphasizes that through following up on the events of the earlier scene, in spite of her many admirable qualities, she is only human, capable of faltering from her rational, empathetic, and pacifistic ideals and allowing her emotional impulsivity to manifest as murder. It is highly regrettable that this, my favorite sequence from the entire film, was cut entirely for the purpose of speeding the film along by removing most of the long, breathy ruminations between characters. The three children giving Nausicaä a parting gift of a bag of Chico nuts for her journey and Nausicaä reassuring them of her return is removed. One of the Temeculae transports downed by the enemy gunship is referred to as Crazy Crow, an English adaptation of the Japanese term Bakagarasu, or Bumble Crow, as in Studio Proteus and Viz's translation of the manga, a pejorative colloquialism used to refer to the slow, cumbersome nature of the crafts. Crazy Crow is the term that also appears in the Anime Age glossary. One of the armor officers refers to the smaller Temeculae craft as the Corbett Fighter, a transliteration of dubious accuracy of corvetto, itself a transliteration of the nautical term corvette, although the exact spelling Corbett is also an Old Norman term for a crow, which is coordinate with the Latin word corvus, which may be in keeping with the crow theme for the colloquial terms for Tolmekian aircraft, but who knows. Corbett is again a term also used in the Anime Age glossary. Zandra reasons that Selena firing her gun in the jungle could ignite hazardous pollutants in the air, rather than drawing the attention of the insects as implied in the original. In the original version of the scene, Nausicaä also likens Kushana's frenzied behavior to that of a lost fox squirrel, calling to mind the gaining of Tato's trust, while in Warriors, Zandra makes the supposition that Selena is not as truly evil as she pretends to be, to which Selena replies,
Haha, but I am.
Localization scholars like Brian Rue tend to single out this exchange as if Selena truly means what she says and isn't just extending her already crumbling pretense, diminishing the nuances of her characterization. I don't think that was necessarily the intent, because the visual language of the rest of the scene plays out the same in both versions, where she is clearly repulsed and frightened by the presence of the insects. In the psychic exchange with the Ohm, Nausicaa's flight suit and mask being pulled away and her visions of the golden field and great tree are deleted. Zandra resentfully explains to the pilot of the enemy gunship that she was on the ship he tried to shoot down, rather than explaining her insect flute and light bombs are now useless countermeasures in the face of the unforgivable number of insects he has killed. The flashback to Nausicaa's childhood attempt at hiding a larval ohm from the villagers, where her father traumatizes her and lays down a dogmatic reassurance of the impossibility of human-insect coexistence, is deleted. Again, another casualty of the removing of scenes that build on characterization rather than advancing the immediate story. Nausicaä awakening from her dream with Tato by her side, a medium close-up of her rising from her rest, and several establishing shots of the petrified forest are deleted. The pilot of the enemy gunship and Lestel's twin brother, Asbel, is renamed Milo. There is a long-held assumption that this name was intended for Mito, with his name, Axel, for Asbel, but at this point again, who knows? Warriors adds an interior monologue and soliloquy to Zandra's exploration of the petrified forest, where she finds ironies in her meetings with Milo and his sister, and the contrast between the pure forest and the toxic jungle above it. Zandra acknowledges the pure sand crystals raining down from the jungle as the sign of a new start, with the implication being that life is beginning anew as in primordial times. As vague as this sequence presents its explanation, the revelation of the true nature of the toxic jungle was not removed from Warriors of the Wind, which is often entirely and wholly inaccurately written off as outright removing the ecological aspects of the text. Nausicaä, realizing the purified sand of the petrified forest and the sand she obtained for her lab are one and the same, Asbel finding Nausicaä tearfully overcome with joy from her discovery, the two discussing Listel's death and the whereabouts of the God Warrior, and the two later discussing the origins and functions of the jungle and the insects, with Asbel expressing doubts for humanity's survival during the remainder of the purification process, is deleted. As is an establishing shot of the valley's castle as steam from the revival process of the giant God Warrior emanates from it. For opening notes from the queue, the annihilation of Pejete were added to the beginning of the scene where Yupa, Axel, and the others deliver an ultimatum to the imprisoned Selena, who now gives the explanation that she suffered the attack that lost her arm and legs when she was a child, rather than giving an off-color elaboration on the full extent of what she's now physically missing.
我が夫となる者はさらにおぞましきものを見るだろう。
Gone is the sequence where the villagers discovered the entire forest that surrounds the valley reservoir has become infected with spores. The matriarch urges the villagers to burn down the entire forest to prevent the spread of the Sea of Decay, and they reluctantly agree. Gol and the other former hostages observe the burning and agree to return to the valley. Zandra is aghast at the prospect of the valley suffering the same fate as Placida, rather than expressing horror and sorrow that the Pagedians would destroy their own city by luring the insects there in the first place. Nausicaä pleading with the mayor of Pejete, explicating her findings about the true nature of the Sea of Decay, and scorning the Pagedians for unearthing the God Warrior in the first place, is deleted. Nausicaä thanking the women of Pejete for freeing her as she and Asbel take a secret passage to the hold where the Mava is kept, is cut. The second lengthiest deletion in the film. Kuratoa discusses the ancient shipwreck with Kushana, speculating it may have even been an interstellar vessel. Kushana contemplates Nausicaa's fate in the jungle, hoping to have a word with her should she return. Kushana urges Gol and the other hijackers of the take to tell the people to surrender, but they refuse and instead discuss Kushana and Nausicaa's opposing characteristics as princesses. As Gol explains he too has the petrification disease, Kushana balks at the idea of coexistence with the jungle, but Gol and Gikari philosophize,
あんたは火を使う。そりゃあわしらもちょびっとは使うがの。多すぎる火は何も生みやせん。火は森を一日で灰にする。水と風は100年かけて森を育てるんじゃ。わしらは水と風の方がええ。
Kushana releases the prisoners and then orders her forces to attack the entrenched villagers in an hour. Gol notices the wind has stopped blowing, and the matriarch and the three children hear an ear-splitting ringing in the air. The matriarch has a premonition of a great amount of rage emanating from the earth itself. The ending credit sequence, where the Ohm and the Tolmekians withdraw, the Pagedians settle in the valley, and Yupa and Asbel depart to explore the Sea of Decay, is deleted. Warriors instead cuts directly from Milo reuniting with Zandra to the seedling sprouting aside Zandra's flight goggles below the toxic jungle. The music from the deleted flashback sequence serves as the underscore for Manson's new ending credits over a black backdrop. Strangely, the roll credits Kazunori Ito's involvement, even though his first draft of the screenplay went unused. Composer Joe Hisaishi is curiously uncredited, while the audio director Shigeharu Shiba is given the music director credit. Now, with all those differences and deletions in mind, you may be curious about what Warriors of the Wind actually does retain as an adaptation. I could have gone over every single small dialogue difference, but that would require a level of pedanticism that I feel is unnecessary for the broad comparison of the major differences between the two. There are jokier lines and exchanges inserted here and there, but I think overall the dubbing script for the parts that were retained is a mostly faithful, though somewhat pragmatic adaptation of the Japanese.
ナウシカ見間違えたぞ。
1年半ぶりですもの。父が喜びます。
礼を言わねばならん。良い風使いになったな。
いいえ、父はまだまだだって。
Lord Yupa!
While I've grown old, you've grown beautiful.
I missed you, Uncle. I'm glad to have you back.
You rescued me just in time. You ride the wind like a master.
Father says I've lots to learn.
旅の途中で不吉の噂を聞いた。ペジテ市の地下に眠っていた旧世界の怪物が掘り出されたというのだ。旧世界の怪物？巨神兵だ。巨神兵？あの火の7日間で世界を焼き尽くしたという。こいつが。
During my travels, I heard rumors. Rumors of a creature from the ancient world that had been uncovered in the country of Placida.
What kind of creature?
A fire demon, One of those that destroyed the ancient world with 7 days of fire? I've heard about them.
ナウシカ、落ち着けナウシカ。今戦えば谷の者は皆殺しになろう。生き延びて機会を待つのだ。
Sandra, stay calm. If we try anything, all our people will be killed. We must stay alive and wait our chance.
還元耳が痛い。辺境一の剣士ユパ・ミラルダとはそなたのことか？我らが目的は殺戮ではない。話がしたい。剣を収められよ。
You are very persuasive, Lord Yappa, with words as well as your sword. We came here to help these people, not to kill, so put away your weapon, please.
あの娘はどうした？
姫様は後ろに乗っとらんぞ。オウムだ。オウムの群れがこっちへ来るぞ。なんじゃと？オウムが？姫様は暴走を食い止めるために一人残られた。戦なんぞしてる暇はない。みんな高いところへ逃げろ。急げ
What happened to your princess?
Yeah, tell us.
She's not in the back seat, I'll tell you
Giant
that.
gorgons, thousands of them, and they're heading this way.
Thousands of them?
Heading this way? Princess Sandra stayed behind to try and turn them around. Now we've got to stop fighting each other. Let's all get to high ground as quickly as we can.
Yeah, you're with it. Let's go. Come on, hurry. Keep on going after those guys.
Sure, you lose a fair amount of the narrative depths and some of the complex characterizations, but all in all, Warriors of the Wind preserves the core of the film. A strong-willed young woman who overcomes adversity through her overwhelming courage, unconditional compassion, and self-sacrifice. Now, it's true that you do lose some of the scholarly aspects of her character, but I don't think that's eliminated entirely. The fruits of her research efforts are not shown, but her knowledge and understanding of the toxic jungle and its insect inhabitants is. But also, Nausicaä is an impulsive character who hones in on her emotional understanding of things in order to enact radical change. That is entirely kept. To say Warriors completely erodes the ecological themes is entirely disingenuous. Anyone who is able to perceive basic allegorical text can comprehend what the film is trying to say about environmental devastation and mankind's relation to nature, and such perception was evident in Manson's original press statement about the film, as well as in many of the reviews it received during its North American theatrical run.